All right, time to sit down and do some Christmas writing.
Let's get some music going.
Simply must go.
Baby, it's cold outside.
The answer is no.
Baby, it's cold outside.
The welcome has
How
been
lucky that you dropped in.
All right. That's inappropriate. I'll find something more appropriate. Yeah, that's much more appropriate. Really respect people. Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Mondays with Mover. I am Mover C.W. Lemoine, author of the Spectre Series and the Alex Shepard Series. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. I hope you're spending your time with your family, having a great holiday season and not triggered by 70-year-old Christmas songs. Special thanks, and let's not forget those that can't be with their families this weekend. The police, fire, EMS, first responders, dispatchers, nurses, doctors, transportation workers, and those serving abroad that are protecting our freedoms and sacrificing so that we can be with our families and enjoy this holiday season. Today I thought I would talk about how I became an author. I've gone through how I became a fighter pilot. I've gone through how I became an airline pilot and how I became a sheriff's deputy. And to wrap it up, to finish off 2018. And the intent of this vlog was for you to get to know me as an author, because this is an author vlog. I thought, what better way than to tell the story of how I became an author. And it's kind of the right time of year, because that story begins in Christmas time. It's a December 27th of 1995 is probably where I would trace that back to. That year I was 12 years old, and it was 2 days after Christmas, and I was home, and my dad came home and said that my mom had something that happened at work, and she was the CFO of a hospital, and we later found out she had an aneurysm and she would later pass away. So that event would later kick off the next year. 96 was kind of a rough year. It was just me, my dad, and my brother for that time period. My brother's got cerebral palsy, so he's special needs, and it's just a rough time. And at the time of my mom's passing, I was really involved in flight sim, which is funny. Now I'm doing DCS videos, but I was involved in Microsoft Flight Sim, doing virtual airlines and stuff, and I was writing news articles for this group called Virtual Airline News Flash. And the editor at the time wanted to branch out and do something else. He was talking about writing short stories and kind of a serial. So I wrote one chapter at a time, because I was going to write this little short story. And it kind of turned into a bonding experience with my dad, because I would write one chapter, print it out, and then put it on the kitchen countertop in the morning for him to read while he would drink his coffee, and we would talk about it. And I would write chapter at a time, one chapter, overnight, put it out there, he'd read it, we'd talk about it, and over time it just built up. And at the time, before my mom passed, she was real into Michael Crichton and John Grisham, so naturally I was too. I loved Michael Crichton. He was my favorite author as a kid. And I was writing this kind of medical thriller thing, because that's what I knew about a mob boss takeover of a hospital group, and botched procedures, and this doctor trying to figure it out and all this stuff. And over the course of the year, I wrote this what I thought was a novel. It ended up being 39,000 words, which, depending on how you look at it, is the cutoff for what a novel is at 40,000. I wrote it. My dad, he's my dad. He told me it was great, and I submitted it to one agent. And the one agent, because I thought, hey, I'm 12 years old. I'm writing a book, and if I can write this, that's amazing. So I thought, going to be world's youngest author submitted it. They said no thank you, and I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess that's that. And I wrote in high school and I wrote in college, just whatever assignment I had, but I kind of didn't write anymore. I started writing a second book as a kid, or 13, 14 years old. I was gonna write it loosely based off of my mom passing, but it was like an alien show or book. But I kind of just moved on to other things, and I got into flying and became a fighter pilot, and that all kind of went by the wayside. And I stopped reading fiction books because at the time, I as a flyer, I always thought if I had time to read, I should be studying something. I should be doing something to make myself better as a fighter pilot. So I didn't really read until F-16 school. I met a girl who was a F-16 pilot, and we started dating, and it started to get serious. And she was in Phoenix in the F-16 B course, and I ended up down in Homestead. So I was doing a lot of back and forth. So she handed me a Vince Flynn novel, and said I'd probably like it. So I needed something to do on the flight. So I started reading these Vince Flynns. I loved it. I love Vince Flynn. Mitch Rapp's a great character. Vince Flynn is kind of my kind of author because he writes very short chapters and it's all action. It's not a lot of flowery language and stuff, which I hate. I hate when they spend pages and pages and pages of describing scenes. So she got me back into the reading, and I went to Iraq, and she gave me a bunch of Mitch Rapp books, and I came back and I was kind of just into that genre. And she started writing. She was the creative type, and by then the relationship had progressed. We were living together and we were engaged, and she started writing a book. And her book was about an F-16 inspection team or whatever. And we're sitting on the couch, and I don't have anything better to do. And I'm like, well, I wrote a book when I was a kid. Maybe I'll try again. So I wrote 5 chapters. At the time, that was the original Spectre Rising. It was actually going to be, Spectre was going to be an OSI agent, which is the NCIS version, Air Force's NCIS, essentially. They're the investigative branch. And it was a little different. And obviously life happens. We ended up breaking up, and, I just got busy with the squadron. I stopped writing. So 2012, when I moved back to Louisiana to go fly for the Navy, I had some downtime because the transfer didn't happen instantly. And I was talking to my good friend Doug Narby, who you may remember from the first DCS video, and he encouraged me to start writing because he'd read another friend's book, and he kind of warned me of the pitfalls of, he called it losing it in the third act. And he was very encouraging. He said, yeah, why don't you if you try it, see if you like it. His phrase was always, it depends on how it's written. So I started writing, and I changed up. He wasn't an OSI agent anymore, and Spectre Rising is available 99 cents right now, by the way, for the rest of the month. Became what it is today, and it took me about a year to finish it. I started in that summer 2012 and finished it right around August of 2013. And as soon as I finished it, a lot of people, myself included, especially me, you get this idea that if you finish a book, you're suddenly going to be famous. It doesn't matter, how good it is or kind of what you do. And boy, that's a lesson to learn. So, you start kind of fantasizing about, how it's going to be your job, how it's going to change your life, and, you're going to be a rock star. And I started submitting it to agents, and, I got a couple rejections, and I said, well, this story is just too good to wait. I'm going to self-publish. So I self-published in September of 2013 because I went to CreateSpace at the time, which CreateSpace is now just part of Amazon, but CreateSpace to put the PDF, and Doug was there helping me edit the book, and we were working on it together, and he said, he's like, you didn't lose it in the third act, which is good. And people who read it, it was mixed reviews. Some people said, yeah, it's okay. Some people say, hey, this is really great. And I wrote the book, I put it out, and September 2013, I talked about this in my low-level video. That time was just that time of my life was, hopeful. Everything was kind of fitting together. I thought, the books were going to be very successful. My dad was still around. I had a great girlfriend. I was loving my flying job. Everything, just the pieces were just there. And I'll never forget. The local newspaper, the Eunice News, and I think my stepmom actually sent this to them, but they picked up on the story. They wrote a little article about me writing my first book, and my dad was just ecstatic. I mean, it was the happiest he ever been. And then when I gave him a copy of the book, and signed it and said, thanks for everything you've ever done for me. This is for you. He starts crying, and he's a very stoic, very tough guy, and it was just tough. He read the book, he liked it, and I dedicated the book to my mom, because she's the reason I kind of started on this journey so long ago. Wrote the book, and then I actually went back to querying agents. One actually came close, but said no thanks, especially since you've already published it. I would later learn that self-publishing is kind of a scarlet letter. Once you self-publish something or a series, if it doesn't become a bestseller overnight, it's really hard for them to justify picking it up. So November 9th, 2013, so a couple months after the book was published, my dad passed away, and things kind of fell apart. And in that time following, I went to what I knew, and the girlfriend was gone, the Navy really wasn't helping me out, they weren't there, but I knew writing, and I knew that as an emotional release, or just a place to vent, it was really good. And I wrote Avoid, Negotiate, Kill, which was the second Spectre book, and that book had, I actually kind of pulled stuff from real life. My dad's funeral was in that book, and I've talked about this before. But on the real life note, the funny thing is, Spectre Rising came out, and my old squadron picked it up, and they found out about it, and they thought that I wrote about them, which couldn't be farther from the truth. It was based in Homestead, just because Homestead in Cuba. I mean, I don't know how you make it any closer. And F-16s, because that's what I knew at the time. Having a fighter pilot fiance, again, I wrote what I knew, but it wasn't about any specific person, or it wasn't supposed to be related to anybody. It was just taking pieces of experience and putting it into a book to make it realistic. And they made it a shrine, I think I heard, in the squadron bar. But I'm sorry, if you guys are watching this, I didn't, this had nothing to do with you guys. It was just me writing and trying to be creative, but and be realistic at the same time. So however, I wrote that book, and I wrote it in the author's note. I wrote it because I did not, and I still don't, I didn't think I was interesting enough to write an autobiography. I thought that I could take pieces of reality and pieces of stuff that I knew or had heard or whatever, and make a really interesting fiction book. But I wasn't a door kicker. I wasn't a frontline guy. I wasn't a war hero. I wasn't somebody that had done anything special. So I just wanted to write, but not really about myself. So, and I hate self-promotion. I hated this has been the hardest part, is once you write the book, that's not the end of it. You have to keep promoting and stuff. So anyway, on that note, I started looking for an agent, and Reader's Favorite had this thing where you send out 1,000 query letters to various agents, and one agent did respond, and I probably should have known better. He wanted to represent the subsidiary rights of Spectre Rising, and around that time, the first bad review came in of Avoid, Negotiate, Kill, which you don't think it bothers you until it does. Somebody gave me a 1-star review on Goodreads, and I was like, well, where's the rest? Well, it's because it was a 3-book series, and it was going to be another book. But anyway, got the agent, and that was so mixed emotions, going from bad review to really good. Get an agent, once again you think everything's going to be great. That agent didn't really work out. He was charging not reading fees, but printing fees. Every time he printed a submission, he said I can only do in paper. When he would send to somebody, and he promised a whole lot of stuff that never happened. So at the end of our little contract, I ended that, so it didn't really go anywhere. In fact, it was funny. I wrote Archangel Fallen, and he's like, "This is really good. Did you write this?" Like, wow, okay. Hey, thanks for the vote of confidence, but So I went back and published Archangel Fallen, and that was the kind of common thing. Every agent was like, look, we can't pick up a book mid-series. Archangel Fallen's part of a bigger series, and we can't just publish this, and you don't have the sales to support us picking up the whole series. So that was kind of a tough lesson. But then I found BookBub, and BookBub did an ad for Spectre Rising, and it was 99 cents, and it became an Amazon bestseller. So, it jumped to number 1 in like 3 categories, and, in the top 50 or so overall of the whole Amazon Kindle stuff. So, there was some success, and I just kept writing. I went and after Archangel Fallen, I started with Executive Reaction, and each book was kind of something I had an idea about. Like Archangel Fallen was just me flying around the Gulf and looking at oil rigs and going, wow, that's a good idea. And then Executive Reaction was after MH370. I had that idea after that happened. And then, I just kept writing. While I was doing that, I started writing. I had a Fighter Sweep. One of the editors came to me and said, hey, do you want to write, fighter articles for us? And that was a great, that helped with, promotion and stuff like that. And I wrote some articles for them, which led to a guy named Suds finding me on Twitter, and we became friends. And simultaneously, I published Brick by Brick, which Brick by Brick was funny because that was my first TV appearance, and then that also became my first book signing, which I don't like book signings, not because I don't like people. I like meeting fans and stuff like that, but oh man, my first book signing, it was during a flood. It was a very small bookstore, it was a Barnes & Noble, but in a small town, and, hardly anybody shows up. And that is kind of a crappy feeling. You're sitting there going, okay, is anybody gonna be here? But that was also the time the flood happened, so I was out helping rescue people, so it was kind of a weird time. But I mentioned Suds because Suds and I started working together on the TV aspect of the books. He actually, was in Hollywood at some point and very connected, and a great guy. Is a very, very good friend. And he helped me. We started working on treatments and stuff, and we started working on trying to make the series something bigger than it was. He introduced me to a person in Hollywood that I'll just call her a producer. And I had written Absolute Vengeance at the time, and I wrote Absolute Vengeance as something to, I wanted, because the series, everybody had said, well, you've written a series, we can't pick it up, and we can't publish it, we can't send it to a major publisher because you've got this other series that's self-published, and we're not going to pick those up. So I wrote Absolute Vengeance as kind of a standalone, this book will be submitted to publishers. And Suds introduced me to this producer who had a friend that was an agent, and she loved the book. She loved the series. She loved the manuscript. She said, this is really good writing. And she introduced me to this agent. So I flew up to New York. I'd just gotten hired by the airline, so I had buddy passes and stuff. And it was, it's country come to town, right? I'm from a small town, and to be able to go to New York and have lunch with these Hollywood types, and the agent, on the handshake, said, I'll represent you. And he read the manuscript again and said, there's some changes I need to make. And some of them were okay, I was no problem with that. Some of them were kind of silly, like he said Odin was racist because, some white supremacist group had used the idea of Odin, and like, that's a Norse god. I'm not going to do that. But he ended up just kind of falling off the face of the earth and just quit responding. He did what the dating world's called ghosting. And so didn't really work out, and I kind of went back to just, do what you know. I wrote, and I was flying at the time, dealing with the kidney issues, dealing with all this stuff. I didn't really have time for, to worry about it. So I published Stand Against Evil, which Stand Against Evil was supposed to continue the Spectre series with the Absolute Vengeance plot, but from a different perspective, which I thought kind of worked out really well. Once the agent was out of the way, Suds and I kind of got back together, started working on the treatments and stuff. We were going to, do some kind of serial and stuff. And then in the summertime of 2017, that producer got back in touch with me and said, hey, how would you like to make Absolute Vengeance a major motion picture? And I said, well, that's the greatest thing I've ever heard. So she invited me out. We went out to Hollywood and had lunch, which again, same thing. You know, I'm starry-eyed going, oh, wow, this is amazing. Had lunch with this director who was a young guy, absolutely great guy. You know, he's done some great work. He's a Turkish director. I think he's awesome. And she's promising, you know, we're going to start production in, 8 months. She's got a guy that's going to write the script. It's going to be great. You know, this whole thing's going to work out just fine. So while I was waiting, because I was, impatient, I started writing the Helios Conspiracy, and I published Absolute Vengeance, because the idea was it was going to be a precursor to the movie, which would have been, started production in the spring, what was the spring of this year, of 2018. And I hired a publicist firm that, was going to help me produce, to get in the media, get signings and stuff. That absolutely was a waste of money. It just fell through. It didn't work out. They did some stuff, but for the amount of money they charged, it just wasn't. It's just a lesson learned. I mean, that's how it's a small business. As a publisher, you're in charge of just about everything. So, waiting for the script, it takes 6 months, and the guy who was in charge of, or who was charged with writing the script, comes up in after 6 months and produces 40 pages. And if you know anything about Hollywood scripts, it's a page a minute. So we were looking for about 2 hours, and we got 40 minutes. And what he wrote was beyond awful. It was, your cop cars with sunroofs. He broke every cardinal rule I had, which is, don't disparage law enforcement. Don't be anti-American. Don't be anti-military. Don't be racist. It was just the levels of awful. It was bad. He quit. I tried to write a script for it, and they didn't care for it, and we just parted ways. The project ended at that point. And so I kept in touch with Suds and his contacts, and met a guy named Brian who has been helping me write a treatment, write a script, all that stuff. But it's just it's a slog. I don't know what's going to happen with that. I've talked about it in previous vlogs. It could be something. I'm in the make them tell you no phase, where I just keep pushing, and hopefully eventually, something will stick. But it's just trying to move pieces forward. It's been a learning experience. On the book side, though, after that I wrote I Am the Sheepdog, and I published the Helios Conspiracy. And in the interim, I've been writing. I started this vlog, actually, and the vlog has been probably the most successful thing I've ever done in the writing thing. Aside from BookBub, which again has made me a best-selling author in some categories on Amazon a couple times, nothing has been better than the YouTube, because I guess me connecting with you guys is just the best. So it's been a tough battle, but it's one that's worth it. I really enjoy it. I enjoy connecting with fans. The best part about writing, and I've had a great cast of support people. Doug, who on a developmental side, he stopped editing and started more of a just, I would write, he would read, kind of like what my dad would do. He would read, give me feedback. Beverly, who has been in, I've acknowledged in the books, Beverly kind of took over the editing duties, and she is awesome. She's very meticulous. She's very highly attentive to detail, and has really polished the books to make them really stand out. And I've done a few things, change covers and stuff like that, but you're running your own small business, and going forward, it's what I want to do, and it's what I want to continue doing. If I had my perfect scenario in life, I would fly fighters and write books, and that's it. And rescue dogs. That'd be my 3 things. So, what's my advice to new writers? Keep writing. It's kind of a cliche, but you just don't stop. A lot of people like to edit while they write. I highly advise against that, because when you do that, you kind of break your creative process, and the more you edit, the more you change the story. It just doesn't flow, and you'll never finish. To me, it's better to just write a continuous stream, stop, get a story together, then go back and edit it once it's all, at least, you've got a shell. It's really hard to chisel something to mold the clay if there's nothing there and you just keep going back, starting over erasing. So I always recommend for people to have to write it all the way out and then do it, and then because you'll never stop rewriting, you'll never be satisfied with it, you'll never finish. And then finally, it's the same thing, the same drive that makes somebody a fighter pilot, makes somebody a cop, makes somebody anything else. You have to make them tell you no. You can't give up. I can show you, I've got an inbox full of rejection letters from agents. I've gotten bad reviews. I've gotten 1-star reviews. I've gotten 2-star reviews. I've gotten people that tell me that, none of it's realistic. You can't let those get to you, because on the other side you have the people that absolutely love it, and that's what makes it worth it. You'll have the people that'll email you and tell you that they can't believe they've never found you before because it's such a great series, and you're their new favorite author, and you'll get some great feedback from people that you never thought, from across the world. The other day I did a Australian Aviation magazine, and Rob told me that he found me because he read my books. And I'm like, holy crap, that is amazing. That's awesome. So it's an experience, it's great. Hope you've enjoyed today's episode of Mondays with Mover. Merry Christmas once more. I hope you have a great holiday, and thanks to everyone for the feedback on the DCS video. Gonk and I have enjoyed reading your comments and responding to your questions. Next week is New Year's Eve. I've got one more video planned. I won't spoil it, but a little bit of motivation for those of you. I know there's a great group of readers or viewers on here that are trying to get fighter slots, so maybe a little pep talk to start you off in 2019. But I hope you've enjoyed watching. Remember, Spectre Rising, 99 cents for one more week. And like, share, subscribe. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.